Welcome, day 2 of the lockdown in South Africa. My name's Scott Wheeler, and you can also find more videos like this on our YouTube channel, Gospel for Africa. And many people have been WhatsApping, asking questions concerning the times we live in. Recently we did a prophecy conference, and many people have responded to that, concerned about, are we in the last days, is Jesus coming soon, all these kind of questions. And I think the reality is that the church have neglected to study eschatology, and are also not premillennial, and so are very confused right now concerning the times in which we live in and what's actually transpiring. And just as I've been giving thought to some of these things, I was just thinking about where this is all leading. And this is the first time the whole globe has gone into a shutdown like this. And there's no doubt in my mind that this would be the first and greatest opportunity for the powers that will arise in the last days, in terms of the 10 kings, who John writes in Revelation 17 and says that the 10 kings will reign with the antichrist for 1 hour, and then they will give all their authority and power to him. There's no doubt in my mind that this is probably their first and trial, as it were, and no doubt using this opportunity to see how easily people can in fact be controlled. How easy is it to lock down the entire globe? How easy would it be to control the people? Because we know that the time's going to come when the Antichrist is going to rise, and he's going to come to power, and he's going to control the whole world. And the world will in fact worship him as God. Now, when you read Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel's interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, it's very clear from that Daniel makes reference to Nebuchadnezzar as being the head of gold, a picture of the lion. He is the king of Babylon. And then a inferior kingdom would arise after him, which are the two arms of the Medo-Persian Empire, Darius the Mede and Cyrus the Persian, and symbolized by the silver, and also symbolized by the bear. And the bear has 3 ribs in his mouth, and very clearly Darius being the first king, the king of the Medes. The 3 kings that would come after him would be Cyrus, and then Artaxerxes and Ahasuerus, the 3 ribs. And then there would be a inferior kingdom after them, which would be a bronze kingdom, also symbolized by the leopard. And we know that that kingdom initially was controlled by Alexander the Great. That leopard then has 4 heads and 4 wings, and we know that after Alexander's death, his 4 generals took over that kingdom: Lysimachus, Cassander, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. And then after that kingdom, an inferior kingdom, which is symbolized by this great dreadful dragon, and a kingdom symbolized by iron. And we know this to be Rome. The kingdom would be divided. There were 2 legs, and we see the east and the west, Rome and Constantinople. And eventually the feet would be part iron, part clay, which is the current time in which we live in. Some strong, some weak nations, but a mix. And then the 10 toes, which would be 10 kings from which the Antichrist would arise. Now, when we read in the book of Revelations and in chapter 13, it's very clear in chapter 13 that there are 2 beasts that arise. The first beast comes out of the sea, and the first beast is a political system, and I believe it's the rise of the 10 kings that will give their power to the Antichrist. It talks about this beast having 7 heads, 10 horns, and 10 crowns. Now, Daniel looks forward when he describes this image, and John, now writing the book of Revelation, looks back. And in looking back, he describes the image as being like a leopard, having feet like a bear and a mouth like a lion. It's amazing that as he looks back up through the ages, he sees from the kingdom he's currently a part of. This is John, and he's under the Roman Empire. And so looking back, he sees first the leopard, the Grecian Empire, and then the bear, the Medo-Persian Empire, and then the lion, the Babylonian Empire. And so he confirms the same teaching from the book of Daniel, the same image, the same system. These are the systems of the world. This is man's system. This is the antichrist system. This is the spirit of iniquity that began from the beginning. And he describes this image as being a political system, and the dragon giving power to this beast, and that the beast would be worshipped for 42 months. That this beast would also speak blasphemous words, would make war with the saints, and would receive all power, and every nation will worship this first beast. So very definitely, this is the rise of the 10 toes, the 10 kings who will ultimately give their authority and power to one man, that man being the world's final ruler before the second coming of Jesus Christ. This man will be demonically empowered. Satan will enter into him, just as with Judas, who was a type of the Antichrist, the one who controlled the money at the time. So this man will control the systems of the world. No one will be able to buy or sell without receiving the mark of the beast, or worshipping the image of the beast. Then there's a second beast that arises, and the second beast is the rise of the false prophet. Now, he has 2 horns, so he looks like a lamb, but he speaks like a dragon. He has all the power of the first beast, but his primary purpose is through signs and wonders to deceive the world so that the world will worship the first beast. So it's almost like the unholy trinity. You have the false prophet who will make way for the rise and the worship of the beast, who is the Antichrist, who ultimately will lead people into worshipping Satan, who is the dragon. And so, same as you have the Holy Spirit leading and giving revelation concerning Jesus, who ultimately leads us to the Father, it's exactly the same principle, but this is the false. The spirit of iniquity is already at work. We see the evidence of the rise of the false prophet. Now, I believe that he will be a man who will come in the future. But even now, that same spirit is working in terms of the deception that's in the world. We've seen within Christendom over the years, especially after Vatican Council II, there was this great drive for ecumenism. All Christian so-called churches coming together. And the Catholic Church is the mother church. That's what Catholic means, universal. They believe that they're the only true church. Peter, the apostle, who was given the keys, and the church is built upon him. That is their understanding, and that we are separated brethren that need to come back to Rome. Now, many churches have come back. The Anglicans are back, the Lutherans are back, the Methodists are back. Many have gone back to Rome. So there is this ecumenism that has taken place, and basically for all so-called Christians to agree, we've had to forego so many doctrines to be able to find a common ground and a unity, and so we reduce everything down to the lowest common denominator. Then in more recent times, they've taken the next step and gone from ecumenism to interfaith. And so you go through the same cycle again of whittling everything down and coming down to the lowest common denominator, and that's where the unity is. And so basically there is no more foundation, and that's why so many churches are floundering at this time, because they're no longer built upon the foundation of Jesus Christ. They've signed up with the World Council of Churches or the South African Council of Churches or whatever it may be, and basically they've made a massive compromise with the spirit of the false prophet and are being deluded into the acceptance ultimately, and will accept the revelation of the Antichrist. And so the false prophet makes way for the worship of the Antichrist. But then in Revelation chapter 17, we then see this woman who is full of the names of blasphemy. She's arrayed in purple and scarlet and gold and precious stones and pearls, has a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and the filthiness and fornications, and has a name, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And she is the woman, that great city, who reigns over the kings of the earth. There's no doubt in my mind that this speaks of Rome. She is built upon, or she rides the first beast, the false political system. And the false beast has these 7 heads and these 10 horns. And it talks about these 7 heads being 7 mountains, and we know that to be Rome. But basically how this plays out is this false religious system that so many have gone back to and subscribed to, the most powerful organization on the planet, rides the first beast and enjoys this for a period of time until the 10 kings give their power to the one, the Antichrist, who then does away with all religion, because the Antichrist is not a religious guy. The false prophet is, not the Antichrist. The Antichrist is a money guy. He is a power-hungry individual. In fact, he doesn't want religion because he wants to be worshipped as God. And so he destroys this woman. And that's the great deception in the last days. All those who sign up for and join in this false religious system ultimately will be destroyed by the Antichrist. They honestly believe that their link and their joining with the false political system is going to give them some credibility and is going to protect them, and they'll be preserved in the future. But in fact, the opposite actually happens. She is totally annihilated, and then the Antichrist will come to power. He will reign for 42 months. He'll sit in the temple. The abomination of desolations will take place. He will be worshipped by the whole world. No one will be able to buy or sell, and people will lose their lives. And this is during the period of Daniel's 70th week, the time of Jacob or Israel's trouble, the time of great tribulation. Now we know the end of the conversation is that the stone that is cut out of the mountain without hands comes and smashes the feet of that image. That entire image is reduced to dust and then blown away by the winds, and the kingdoms of this world have now become the kingdom of our God, because that stone who is crossed then swells and fills the whole earth. So Jesus will ultimately destroy everything that Satan has done for the last 4,000 years, and then he will set up his kingdom, and he will rule and reign initially for 1,000 years. That's why we are pre-millennial. The millennium is yet to come. If you're not premillennial, none of these things seem to make sense right now. And so this is what's going to happen. And so I believe that the powers that be are going to use this as a test for future control over the globe, because the time has to come where this false political system, together with the false prophet and ultimately this godless religious system, the woman riding the beast, has to come together, and the entire world will ultimately be under their sway and their control. And so there's no doubt we're going to see coming out of this corona massive change in legislation all over the globe. This is just the beginning of sorrow, so there'll be more such things like it, but slowly we will lose our freedoms. Not that we have much freedom anymore, but slowly we will be enslaved, and we will willingly become enslaved to the system because it will make sense, but not for the true believer in Jesus Christ. Church, understand this. Our time is running out. We need to preach the gospel like we've never preached before Jesus comes to snatch us away in what we know as the rapture. The church will face greater persecution. There will be more legislation against the church. There's no doubt that the mega churches are going to suffer in this next phase. My persuasion is the church will go back to how it was in the book of Acts. We'll meet again in small groups, break bread from house to house, but we will be the true church, filled with the Spirit of God, empowered to go out and to be salt and light in this world. And so there's no doubt that we need to make sure of our calling and our election. We need to make sure at this time that we built upon the foundation of Jesus Christ, because the faith of every single one of us is going to be shaken. We're going to have to examine what we believe. Now's the time to make sure that you are built upon the only foundation, the one true foundation, who is Jesus Christ. There is no other foundation, according to Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. And so the challenge to the church in these times is, let's put aside the games and the gimmicks and the following of these false prophets who have promised so much and delivered nothing. They are clouds without water, Peter says. It's time for the church to arise, to be what God intended for us to be from the beginning. And so now's our time to go back to the teachings of the apostles. We're the Gentile church. Paul specifically was the apostle to the Gentile church. Let's go back and let's see what the apostles taught. Let's be grounded upon those principles, and then let's rise up in that authority and that power that God's given us, with the mandate to go into all the world, preach the gospel, baptize and teach everything that we have been taught. And know this, Jesus said that all authority, all power has been given to me in heaven and on earth. You go on that basis. And he promised us he would be with us always, even unto the end of the age. And so be encouraged. Don't be rattled by what's going to come in the future. Things are going to get progressively worse. There's going to be a greater control. But yet in Jesus, you and I are free. Nothing will ever separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus. Be strong in the grace and the power of his might, because you and I are more than conquerors through Christ who strengthens us. And if God be for us, who can be against us?